Okay, so today we're doing AP English in AP week for Bruin to Bruin, and this is day 3. First, we'll introduce our speakers, who are Aru and Chantal.
All right, so let's get started. As Anjana has introduced, I am Aru, and I'll be walking you all through the AP English Language and Composition class and exam. So first of all, we got which is 45 multiple choice questions and 3 free response questions. You are given 1 hour for the multiple choice, and then you are given 2 hours and 15 minutes for the free response. For the multiple choice, you will encounter 2 types of questions. One is comprehension-based, where you read a passage and then answer questions based on the text. Then you have grammar-based questions where you analyze sentences and you check to see if they're grammatically correct, or you make these edits to make them better. For the free response questions, these are the essays. The 15 minutes that you're given along with the 2 hours is meant for reading, and you'll find that most prevalent in the synthesis essays because those give you the sources to use, and you need to read them before synthesizing and supporting your thesis. For the rhetorical analysis, you are also given a prompt, which is an essay by an author, and you are supposed to analyze it and understand the purpose and meaning behind it, why the author writes it. You'll find that a particularly useful tool is Soapstone. You might have learned it in your other English classes, so I would highly recommend reviewing that. And then you have the argumentative essay, which is usually a one-line statement or a question. So you're either for or against a statement, or you give your own opinion and then support it with evidence. And note that the evidence is not provided for you. You have to come up with that with your own background knowledge or stuff that you learn within your classes. Next. So, do you need to be in English 2 honors as a prerequisite? Not necessarily. While English 2 honors does serve as a transition point and helps helps you think critically, you don't necessarily need to have the honor title to be considered AP worthy. As long as you are confident within your own abilities as a writer, as a reader, then you should be good. I've known people who just went from on-level English 2 to AP Lang. I even seen some people who went from English 1 honors to AP Lang. So don't let the title of the class, make you feel insecure about your abilities. Anyone can, take AP Lang. Next. So, how do you prepare for essays? Well, for one, on the exam, you will not be given the prompts beforehand, and you won't be allowed to bring a sheet of paper with you with brainstormed ideas or sources that you want to use. So, because either way, you would be getting an unfair advantage, and the AP exams are always trying to make it fair for everyone. So, the only way to really prepare is to practice writing essays. And while I understand that might not be the most fun thing to do, it really does help. Your teachers will be having you write essays in class, but it won't be as often since they are regarded as assessments. And obviously, they won't, throw assessments at you all the time because they are aware that you have other classes to focus on. So it's really up to you to practice outside of class. I would suggest on the weekends. And I may not have mentioned before, but in the essays, since you're given 2 hours for 3, that's 120 minutes. So that means you have 40 minutes for each. So make sure that when you are writing the essays, you're not spending 2 to 3 hours editing and everything because you won't get that kind of time. You only have 40 minutes. And so make sure to set your timer to that. I would personally recommend setting it to 35. So that way you have that extra 5 minutes to read over things and notice any mistakes that you may have. Next. So, what did I find the most difficult to do when I was in AP Lang? It's really just getting into the zone of writing an essay because there's a bit of that starting anxiety. It's if I don't get this intro and thesis right, then everything else will get messed up. So, at first when I wrote my first essay, in AP Lang, I was panicking. I was I really got to make this good. And when I saw the result of that and it wasn't as great as I expected it to be, I was like, wow, I could have done so much better. But with time and practice, you get desensitized to that anxiety and it really does get better. So practice makes perfect. I will definitely say that. Next. Are there any outside sources that I used? Most definitely. I don't think it's possible to write the argumentative essay without using any outside sources. Your teachers will have you check up on the news as often as possible. You might be given assignments where they'll ask you to summarize articles and then analyze them or give your commentary on them. This is meant to help you get like general background knowledge of what's happening in the world around you, because usually the prompts that are given are either in the past or in the current day and time. So your teachers will have you do that, but at the same time, you should also be keeping up with the news on your own. You don't necessarily have to like analyze and summarize, but just know like what's going on. It's good for like adding little bits of information to make yourself at least look smart to the examiner, the person who is grading your essay. Another tool that I used as an outside source, and it is very useful, is APUSH. If you are taking APUSH with AP Lang, it really goes nicely for the historical prompts because you know the context behind it. And for your intro paragraph, you can use a little bit of that background info to kind of like transition between your intro sentence to your thesis, if that makes sense. And the essay that I'm about to go over with you, I did use my APUSH knowledge to help me out. Next. So this essay that I'm about to show you is the essay that I wrote for the AP Lang exam for 2020. I wrote it on a Google Docs because this was the minimized version. I wasn't able to take all 3 essays and the multiple choice. I did get a 5 on this exam, so this is what I can show you as, like, I guess, a strong rhetorical analysis essay. So this is the intro paragraph. It was on World War I believe. And as you can see, I think it is the second sentence, right? So when I say, with the United States rebuilding itself from the Great Depression, Ick saw an opportunity to rise above it and help the United States in its venture to become powerful democracy. As you can see, I did not write to become a powerful democracy, but it was not counted against me. So these examiners, when they're looking at your essay, they're not expecting it to be like totally perfect, ready to be published and sent out to the world. They understand that this is a rough draft, but they're just trying to see how good of a rough draft can you make it. So in general, you want to have like the background knowledge, which is like the author who is writing this, what time it is being written at, context, and then you have the thesis. The thesis is the main part. If you can't come up with an intro, don't worry about that. As long as you have a strong thesis, the rest of your essay will be okay. So in my case, it was by recounting the several stories of conquests and rebellion and solidifying the concept of unity among nations, Ick inspires his citizens to dedicate everything they can to the war effort, to freedom and democracy. So as you can see, it's a very long thesis, but it's also very open. Something that you're taught in your essays beforehand is a very like closed kind of thesis where it's like, it's about this, this, and this. 3 things, that way you can have like a 5-paragraph essay, but it's more fluid in AP Lang where you can write from anywhere between 4 to 6. That's usually the range within 40 minutes. Definitely don't do 3 though. That kind of shows that you have a little bit of weakness in writing. So I would just suggest 4. But yeah, if you have an open-ended thesis, it's much easier to write about because you're not like constrained to fulfill every like restriction that you have with it. Next. So this is the first body paragraph. I'm not going to read through all of it, but the general format is obviously evidence analysis, but you have to make sure that the analysis is the bigger part. And you'll learn in AP like how to quote evidence in different ways, both grammatically or like sprinkling it in. You want to incorporate as little evidence as possible, but like be able to analyze a lot from it. So, sometimes it's just like general reasoning, like what you make of it. But in a rhetorical essay, you try to like not incorporate like me, what I believe. It's more like just like statements. So like I said, peace cannot exist without war, so war is naturally a constant, which kind of makes sense because with if there is, if there is peace, then there was before it to make sure that the peace was there in the first place. So you just keep like building upon it, and then you add another second piece. In terms of how much evidence can you use in each paragraph, I would suggest two as the general rule of thumb, but you can use three, four, as long as you have solid analysis coming after it. And also make sure to have a transition point at the end or a conclusion statement of some sort. So, like for me, it was rather than anticipating the worst, the audience is instead more inclined to agree that they must prepare accordingly. I did not add this before. Not only do you want to have evidence and analysis, you also want to show how it affects the audience, because in this type of essay, it's like what is the author trying to gain out of this? So obviously they want to affect the audience. Next. So same kind, but it's like kind of different. Like I said, I had an open-ended thesis which had general ideas, so I, based another idea off of it and used the same method. I used little evidence, more analysis, and then how it affects the audience. Next. Finally, you have the concluding paragraph. This is usually something that a lot of students struggle with because they are running out of time. And they're like, I need to like end it off somehow, but how can I make it good? That's where, like I said before, I would suggest having like a 35-minute timer in comparison to a 41, because you have that time to look over, or you can use that time to write that conclusion paragraph. So for me, I use my APUSH knowledge of the Great Depression, because Great Depression was an economic recession, and that really like helped me strengthen my last paragraph. And I did something that a lot of people usually don't do. I did use a quote from the passage at the end of my essay, and that's totally okay. You can put your evidence anywhere. I'm not sure if it's possible to do it in an intro, but if you find a way, there's like no like hard and fast rule saying that you can't do that. You can. Just make sure that your essay is cohesive, it makes sense, and it addresses all the points. Next. So what we got here is the rubric. I'm using the rhetorical analysis one, but AP College Board, what was it now? AP Classroom, that's what I meant. AP Classroom, they have the rubrics for all the essays. We did adopt a new rubric. Originally, it used to be out of 9, but here it's out of 6. So they have the thesis, which is you either get the point or you don't. If you get the point, that means you've responded to the prompt with a defensible thesis that analyzes the writer's rhetorical choices. You'll find similar wording for the other one. For the argumentative, it'll be like, you have a thesis with a claim. Or if it's the synthesis one, it's like, you have a thesis that relates to the sources, etc., and etc. Next. So this is the evidence. It's a little hard to read. I know that. But this is where you get the 4 points because it is the bulk of the essay. The evidence is specific and it supports your claims or like, your thesis, and the commentary also ties it back to the thesis. Next. And then finally, this is your last point. So it demonstrates sophistication of thought and or complex understanding of the rhetorical situation. So in summary, it's like what you're just like kind of restating what you just said in the essay, but instead of it being like a summary, it's kind of like a third person commentary. Like you're not saying your explicit opinion on the essay, but you're like, here's like what it could have been about, during that time. But yeah. So that's how the rubric is. You get 1 point for the thesis, you get 1 point for the conclusion, and then your 4 points in between with the body paragraphs. Uh, I'm not sure, so don't take my word for it, but I think it's between 4 and 6 that gives you a passing grade on the AP Lang exam. And yeah, that's all I've got to say on this.
Okay, so now we'll be going over AP Lit, which is usually taken after you take AP Lang, so your senior year. It's very similar to the Lang exam in terms of like 55 multiple choice questions, and then there's 3 free responses, except that AP Literature focuses on like literature, so like fictional pieces rather than like real life sort of stuff. So there would be an analysis of the poem that they give you, analysis of a given passage, and then analysis that examines a specific concept, which you will need to like select a piece of fiction from memory to like write about. Will taking Lang prepare me for lit? I think it definitely does. I did take lit online, which might have like impacted my perspective on it, but Lang basically, got me used to like the 45-minute limit, I believe, on like writing essays and just being able to think really shortly, come up with outlines. The writing style is pretty similar. I think you analyze similarly, like you also look at structure, you look at mood, and you write about that in your essays. So I would definitely recommend taking Lang. People have also said that taking Lang like prepares you for like the SAT in terms of like the reading and writing sections. I think it does too, but also the SAT might not be required for you guys. So I'm not super sure if you need to do it, but I think taking Lang is definitely a good thing to do before taking lit. How many or what books do you recommend reading for the final essay? Oh, so the final essay, um, so throughout the year, you are required to read books, and I think we read like 4, maybe like The Handmaid's Tale, Frankenstein, Hamlet, and then we had like a lit circle thing where we picked our own book to read towards the end of the year. I believe that should be enough. I had Mr. Espinoza, and he picked books that were like pretty broad that could apply to a variety of concepts like feminism or like race critical theory. Oh, there are critical theories that you study, and then you learn how to apply the books that you study throughout the year to those critical theories, which then like prepares you for answering that final essay question. So you'll be totally fine as long as you keep up with the class and don't slack off on reading. Um, I would recommend that at the end of the year you just kind of skim over Spark Notes so you kind of remember what's going on, and then you can write about that in your essay. Okay, I'm also gonna share my screen because I have some like useful materials. I guess I didn't put it on the slides. Um, okay, let's just. I'll take that as a yes. Okay, so Mr. Espinosa gave us a thing called slam, which is like in Lang you learn soapstone, like speaker, audience, occasion, like that sort of thing that helps you write about different things in your essay. But in literature, we use something called slam, which stands for structure, language, effect, and meaning. And you basically apply this to the first 2 essays. You just look at like what's the punctuation like, what's the stanza like, is there figurative language, what's the mood like, what is the subject of the poem, how does that like affect the overall meaning, and you just write about that in your essay. I think the first 2 essays are like not difficult if you took Lang because it's just you think about it in the same way, but you just use like different, like almost similar tools to think about it. I'm gonna open this doc, which talks about critical theory. This is something that you study throughout the year because it's pretty important, not just for analyzing literature, but also just looking at life in general. Like when you see like on the news, like, is this like accurate? How would I know what biases are in it? So I believe there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 critical theories that you study throughout the year. So first you got feminist critical theory. It's about, like how does patriarchy affect like the meaning of the book? How are women portrayed and how does that affect the meaning of the book? And then Marxist, which is like about like divides in like the like social divides or economic divides and how they affect how like a character is made or something like that, and how that reveals a meaning about the book. And then the third one is critical race theory, which as it's in the like name, it's about different races, and like how does that affect the meaning of the book? How are different characters of different races portrayed, and what does that say about the author? How does that change the meaning of the book if like versus if they were all the same like race or something like that. And then the fourth one is psychoanalytic. This one's a little bit more difficult, at least it was for me. It was like trying to think about how the character like grew up and how their way of thinking was formed almost. So I think Mr. Espinoza will like probably explain it better than I will, but there's like these different bullet points. It's like unconscious, repression, adipical, adipal? I don't know how to pronounce it. Complex, defenses, anxiety, core issues, Thanatos and Eros. You'll study these more in depth, but for example, when we're reading about Frankenstein, we learn that, Frankenstein is like this monster that is constructed by a human being, and he looks like a adult, like he's giant, right? But he is a child basically because, he didn't have that like period of growth. And how does that affect like how he reacts to the outside world when he goes outside and sees, oh, no one likes me. How do I react to that if no one likes me? Yeah. And then the last theory is queer critical theory, which relates to the LGBTQIA plus, and like how does that affect how we view the meaning of the book and how do the characters act because of like this. So yeah, basically you'll use these theories to understand like the meanings of the books that you read in class, and then you'll also write about it in your essays, which can help you give that sophistication point that Arunma mentioned earlier in like the grading system. The grading system is pretty similar. You've got like some points for your thesis, some points for having evidence and like good reasoning, and then some evidence for like, not some points for being sophisticated. Yeah. And then there's also like a tone mood word list that Mr. Espinoza will give you that is pretty useful if you're like stuck. It's loading. Yeah, so it's like just some words where you're like tone speaker's attitude. So you'd be like, oh, he wrote about the character in this way, and that means that blah blah blah, but adds whatever meaning to the book. And then mood is also something that you also analyze in your essay if it's applicable. There's also literary terms and techniques. I don't think you don't need to know all of these. Like I don't know all of these. I did pretty well in the class, I think. As long as you have stuff to analyze, you don't need to go find some like fancy like thing to analyze. Like, what's a fancy thing? Like implied metaphor. Like I didn't study that in class, but you don't need to know everything. But this is just a list that kind of helps you understand things to analyze if you need it. You'll also get this in class. And then these are like some essays I wrote. They're like pretty similar in terms of structure, like the one that Arunima went over earlier, like where you have your thesis and then you've got like a paragraph about a tool that the author uses, and then you just do one paragraph for like every tool and then you summarize it together. And same as Arunima said, you could do like 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs for evidence. It's really up to you and how much time you have, as long as you can actually go in depth and like show that you know what you're talking about. Yeah, I'm going to show examples of Q3 prompts because I think that is a little bit different than like analyzing a poem or passage. So I'm going to read one of the prompts. According to critic Northrop Frye, tragic heroes are so much the highest points in their human landscape that they seem the inevitable conductors of the power about them. Great cheese more likely to be struck by lightning than a clump of grass. Conductors may, of course, be instruments, as well as victims of the divisive lightning. Select a novel or play in which a tragic figure functions as an instrument of the suffering of others. Then write an essay in which you explain how the suffering brought upon others by that figure contributes to the tragic vision of the work as a whole. So you would get that prompt, and then you have to immediately think, okay, what books did I read this year? What books relate to this prompt? And then you start writing. Like you've got like quick, like maybe like 5 minutes is the suggested time to like be thinking about it and like outlining. So I use The Handmaid's Tale. So I said Atwood uses Offred's story in The Handmaid's Tale to depict a dystopian world where women are marginalized. representing modern oppression in a fictional world, ultimately warning the readers of the consequences of inaction as it perpetuates oppressive behavior. So in a thesis, you'd have like, this is like a statement about the book that's true, and then you take that and make it like into a wider perspective, and then you say how that applies to like just a general thing about the world. Yeah, so I have 3 different prompts that were given, but I used The Handmaid's Tale for each one, which shows that the books that Mr. Espinoza chooses are pretty like open, like you can relate them to a lot of different prompts. So you don't need to be worried about having to read a whole bunch of books or anything like that. Just follow along with the class and you'll get through. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about AP Lit. So I'll stop sharing.
So yeah, if you guys have any other questions, then you can send them in the chat, or else I think we're done for today. Okay, yeah, thank you.